Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fintech Focus TV with me, Toby Babb. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce you to Jas Shah from Bitsul. Jas, how are you doing?
I'm good, Toby. How are you doing?
Really good indeed, really good. Listen, lovely to have you on the show. Had a little bit of a preamble beforehand, and it's talking about one of the most interesting areas of the last year or so, which is a deep dive into the product management world. So we'll come on to all of that, but there's so much more that we're going to be talking about today as well. You started a business up a couple of years ago, which is always an interesting time to start a business or to be running a business through a pandemic at that sort of stage. So we're going to come in and unpack some of the stories through all of that. But before we go into all of that, can I ask you to introduce yourself, the company, and a little bit of the story so far?
Sure. I'm Jas. I'm founder and consultant at Bitsul, and effectively we provide fintech and product expertise to organizations of varying sizes. Largely within the fintech sphere, and from the discovery side of things all the way up to scale and growth. And I founded, we've spoken about this before, but I founded Bitsul a couple of years ago now, after working in financial services for around 10, 11 years. And I just found myself getting to a point where I was working on projects and wanted to make more of an impact, and more frequently. Lots of the projects I would work on were 2, 3, 4 year projects, or they were single applications, and they kind of just run for 4 or 5 years. So I wanted to make more of an impact to more organizations and just add more value, add more breadth and depth. So that's kind of the background behind it. Recently worked on different projects from challenger bank builds to pitches for new propositions, to personal finance management apps, SME propositions. Last year I worked with an organization remotely, and we might touch on that as well, but worked in with an organization in Australia, providing effectively a digital bank for SMEs, but they're all based over there and I'm based over here. So that was it's a fun challenge, and maybe one of the upsides of working remotely.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, this is the gift and the curse of the last 18 months or so. So you're 6 months into running, to running a business, and which is based on connections and networks and personality and all of that sort of stuff. I imagine that's sort of based around people you've worked with historically, or people who know people who know your work, etc., etc. And then we have this sort of vice-like grip come into the marketplace of the pandemic and everything in between, so that sort of creating this problem, which people have turned into a positive, right? Because as you said there, and it's well worth unpacking, we are suddenly the world is a lot smaller a place. We're dealing with Australia from here, and they become a viable client base, no matter where in the world you are, and that suddenly creates a lot of opportunities for you. So talk to us about the last year and some of the lessons that you've seen and how this has actually been this potential problem and potential negative that's hit the world. People like you have managed to turn into a positive.
So I think to be honest, there's a bit of luck involved, because back in January, back at the start of January, I agreed to work on a project, and I kind of knew it was going to be reasonably lengthy, so minimum six months and maybe up to 12 months. My intent going into it was I'll work on it for 6 months and then I'll move on to the next thing, which was kind of the point of me finding Bitsul in the first place. Worked on it for 2 or 3 months, and then obviously things the pandemic hit. Had the pandemic hit and I hadn't been in a role, I think it would have been a lot harder. I think I had that kind of comfort blanket of, firing on all cylinders, being full speed ahead on a project. So I kind of just instantly switched from one day, working in an office, to working remotely, because the client was remote anyway. So a lot of the interactions I'd had with the client had been video calls, phone calls, Slack messages. So the transition wasn't that hard for me at the time. But over time, the more the project went on and the deeper it got through the pandemic, I think it, like the one downside of that, I think, is that if communication channels aren't clear and kind of open, that's when it becomes more difficult. I find that the organizations who have thrived are the organizations who have, clarity over what channels to use for what, openness on things like Slack or Link or Teams, clarity on, working hours, for example, because I think that's it became a little bit ambiguous on the project I was working on. What hours were people doing? And often people would log in at 8 and then just work until 9 p.m. because there's no office setting where people, leave the office and you're the only one left. So you don't know if you're, overworking or underworking, because there's no real benchmark, because you can't look around and see other people. So I think that's
really interesting, that, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the pros, to be honest, of being in an office environment. I think maybe my personal view on it is that the hybrid model, and I think it's very easy to say hybrid, but the hybrid model of selecting a couple of days where you can go into the office is probably the best way of transitioning back, and then seeing where that ground settles. And again, I think another thought of mine when it comes to remote working is that for the people who don't want to go back to the office ever, having more like localized commuter town hubs where people can go still and have that separation of work. Because like I'm in a room now, but I've upgraded my flat because of I didn't have an office in my last flat and I worked in the living room. I just became so monotonous going into the living room, sitting at the dining table, working, then eating, and then relaxing in the same room. It was like death by 1,000 cuts for me. So I think there's going to be a hybrid model when it comes to office space, but I think more localized, like co-working spaces, like spread across commuter towns. I suppose will commuter towns even be called commuter towns? Because where are going to be people commuting from and to? I suppose is
we just finished a conversation internally talking about exactly the same things about maximizing space and geographies and talent pools, etc., and it certainly does open up a number of interesting opportunities and thought processes. So I'm interested from you because that sometimes that sort of going out there and building a business or a consultancy can be about that sort of desire to have the flexibility and freedom and sometimes even lack of contact with with other people that people are looking for. I imagine from what you've just been talking about there, one of the things that you thrive off is the interaction with customers, with clients, with end users. How's that been for you?
It's been hard, to be honest, because again, me again personally, I think I can only speak personally because it depends on different personality types, but I thrive off having that face-to-face conversation, and Zoom is great for that, but I think just those initial conversations, having them face-to-face and then moving to Zoom is a lot easier. So for example, I've had clients who I knew before, and I had clients that I never knew and I've only met and interacted through Zoom, and it's the ones that I've met before. It's way easier to just pick back up off something you've spoken about. But with the new clients like over Zoom, it is just a lot harder to build that relationship. But again, you have to, for me, I've over communicated, I've over not explained, but I've over written things. So I'll write emails and follow-ups and like superb amount of detail in a conversation as I'm speaking. Because making sure that the follow-ups are there is for me, it's quite important. So I've ended up writing a lot more in terms of follow-ups to clients now than I would have done before.
I think that's really, really important. And actually, be it in an internal business or as a sales or customer or whatever it is, interaction. One of the things I've seen that's really, really worked and a constant theme of the near 200 of these episodes that we've run over the course of the last year or so, a commonplace piece has been the importance of world-class communication, and that's that's something which I think is you're absolutely right to move into, which is a big part of the whole product management world, right? By nature, in what you've been doing, decent and clear communication has been a natural part of that sort of job. Product management, as we were talking about before, seems to have never been more on vogue. We've seen it become one of the sexy sort of roles and one of the most common roles we've been hearing about over the course of the last 2-3 years in our day job as a recruiting business. And product seems to be the rise of the CPO is something that we've spoken about on the show beforehand, with more and more people recognizing that alongside people, really developing a outstanding product's been the key to success. And that spreads across everything from institutions through to startups in the area of product management has been something there to make sure that sits at the absolute core of success in the space. Product management in fintech is something very dear to your heart. I know. I'm teeing up a sort of massive open question here for you to grab it and run with. Tell us about the sort of changes in product management you've seen over the course of the last year or so, and why has it become such a sexy piece of the industry?
Yeah, I think the rise itself is more around terminology and focus rather than it never existing. So I think the rise is just more a rise in awareness of what the role is. Traditionally, I like early on in my career, I was a programmer for about 9 months, and then I moved into an analysis role, and then I was a BA, then I was a senior BA, PM, and then the role started to kind of shift into a product role. But if you talk about the functionality and the responsibilities of the product manager role versus a senior BA role, there's massive amount of overlap in terms of the analysis side of things, in terms of doing discovery and research and really diving into a customer problem and making sure you're building something for a specific customer base that's going to be valuable and going to actually solve a problem. I think that's always been there. It's just, I think the focus and the terminologies kind of become a bit clearer and more, it's come more to the surface. In terms of the startup space, what I've noticed is that I think the CPO role has because of the rise in terminology, I think founders and CEOs have realized that they can't do it all, especially founders and CEOs who don't necessarily have the tech product management side of things, and they come from maybe more of a business background. I think what they've realized is that, although they initially do that core product stuff, which is there's a problem, I've analyzed that there's a problem, I've done some research, I've come up with like a solution I think fits. And that's maybe, the first three to 6 months of most founders' journeys. They do that work. It's after that bit that they realize that they have to do business development, do pitch decks, raise funding, look at hiring and things like resourcing, and look at financing and 10-year trajectory. That's when they realize that part of the role that they did, which was a product role early on, they now can't fully do that. So that's what I've seen is usually it's at that point where the CPO role becomes invaluable, because you still need to continue that. If you're going to evolve, you're going to create a great product that continues to be great throughout 3, 4, 5, 6 years. You have to have one, a dedicated person looking at the strategy, looking at an ever-moving market, looking at an evolving customer base, and making sure that their wants and needs are met on an ongoing basis, not just when you create the product the first time.
So looking at that, you mentioned so many different elements there and I'll come on to another issue which I like to look at the moment, which is sort of clash between the founder and the product guys, and passing the baby over, because I think there's some difficulty around that you probably seen as well. But let's go back a step before we move into that conversation to look at this sort of anatomy of a great product manager, because there are product managers who've come through the change world, be it BAs or PMs, etc., or a hybrid of both. There's people who are out and out product guys. There are people who started up in development. There are people who've been in business or sales and moved into that sort of area. There's a load of different backgrounds and no one is the right one, in my opinion, to make the ideal product manager. Some of it will be from business, who then had the sort of they've felt the pain on the other side, and then can help shape and progress the product from there as well. From what you've seen and your time in it and around it, what is the anatomy of a world-class product manager?
I think that's I mean, I'm not going to say that's the impossible question, but it's tough to answer. I don't know if have you ever played Pro Evolution Soccer or FIFA or any of those games?
I've been known to.
So I think in PES specifically, you've got, you have footballers, and there's usually like a hexagonal chart with different abilities. Each point.
The spidergrams.
Yeah, exactly. The spidergrams. And you might have 3 world-class footballers, and they're all, all 3 are, rated as the top 3 footballers, but they're, where their spikes meet the point of the spider diagram are very different. So one might be great at heading and finishing, and one might be great at tackling and slide tackles and standing tackles, and one might just be a great dribbler and have high speed. All 3 are brilliant footballers. All 3 have completely different attributes. But again, if you're going to the anatomy of it, I think the core of it is the basics. I think the need and want to learn anyway, because you have to be on top of what's going on with your customer base. You have to be on top of what's going on with the product itself. You have to understand what the tech constraints are within the organizational team, but also externally, like where the technology framework is heading. For me, the best product managers I've seen are the ones who they understand the technology to varying degrees again, and they understand the market that the product offering is in. And then it's about those different spider diagrams. For example, if you're an absolute expert in the market, then you might be a better product strategist, for example, because you understand, well, the market's heading this way, so what we should do is we should slightly evolve the product. And then maybe another product manager in the team who's more tech focused can translate that stuff into, okay, well, the tech constraints are this, and this. So I think it varies, but I think inevitably product sits in between, the technology and kind of the business, with elements of creativity and design and ops. But having the basic tech understanding and understanding the market where the product sits, I think is fundamental.
I think it's really, really interesting you put it, and it sort of speaks my language to sort of turn it into into people in the company will be who are listening to this will be smirking about my sort of love of a sporting analogy to bring something to life a little bit. But I think that sort of ensuring you put the sort of right player in the right position, to me is there, and no one product manager is the same, and people have different skill sets, and that's why I think it's such an interesting area to recruit for, because there are so many different backgrounds that can come into it.
It's even different. Sorry to interrupt, but it's even different for different. Again, I mentioned the varying organizations at various stages. So if you're in the discovery phase of a product build, you've just got maybe a bit of funding, seed money, and you're in the ideation phase doing customer research, that product person is probably very different to a product person a year later, where you've got an established customer base, you've got regular revenue, you've got multiple funding rounds, and you're ready to scale to 100 million customers. Those two product people are very, very different, because the needs and wants are very different. But at its core, if you understand the tech and you understand the market, you'll be adequate for the position, but the actual fit might be very different at the 2 ends of the scale.
Yeah, and you can look at both of those from different angles as well. Let's look at that other issue that I mentioned just beforehand as well, because I think it's really interesting. I see it pop up quite a lot in difficulties product managers have going into a business, because you've mentioned there the sort of startup, scale up sort of world in particular, and it might be that sort of seed or Series A where they're raising money, for staff, and anyone who's putting money into those businesses, early stage tech businesses will be looking at that product world and that CPO as a critical hire. And they'll do it because, for exactly the reasons you said, they want their founders to be focusing on other areas of the business other than sort of really taking the product. The issue you quite often see there is people sort of handing their baby over for someone else to manage the development of the product, which can lead to a little bit of squabbling, and they're my toys and it's my football. Going back to that analogy, tell me a little bit about how you've seen that go right, and how do founders look at that to get the best possible solution for their business.
Yeah, I think initially, at least identifying that it's a problem it is for me one of the key things. So identifying that this is going to be hard. I've done all the product work to date, and I need to hand over some of this stuff to someone else, and it's their dedicated role to do that. I think that identifying that has to happen is probably the first hurdle. And I try and come in at that point where at least the founder understands that they have to transition a bit. And I think maybe the closest analogy is, look, the founder's taken that baby up until university, and now the best thing for the kid now is to go to university, and the founder just has to let go a bit and hope that all of the prep that they've done from birth to now has set them up in the right way. So as long as the founder's got the right principles in place, organizational stuff, process stuff, the right tools in the organization so that everything's mapped correctly, the roadmap is stable, like all of that kind of stuff is the foundational prep stuff. I think as long as that's there, it's relatively easy to start moving away, and knowing that it's as long as the tools and framework is there, that it's in capable hands, and the founder usually still has a massive amount of input, because essentially they're still the CPO usually report into them.
Yeah,
so
it's a skill set from both sides, isn't it? It's the delegation and discipline of the founder to be able to do that, but it's also then the discipline and emotional intelligence, which I think is a really important part of a good product manager, to be able to sort of take, translate, update, and be cognizant of the difficulty of that sort of scenario. And to me, the people who've really achieved well in that sort of particularly as I say, seed Series A, who come in there and take those product positions, it's a really important thing for them to get right, and to empathize with the journey they're on as well.
Absolutely. I think the emotional intelligence thing is massive, because it covers comms, it covers empathy, it covers understanding the background and coming at it the right way, and also understanding the rest of making sure that you communicate in a way to the rest of the team that's taking everyone on the journey with you, rather than just be a CPO that's like, I make the decisions, this is the product now, this is how it's going to be. I think EQ is massive. Yeah,
and that confidence in their own skin to be able to deal with that at the same time too. It sort of comes on as well to another area, and this sort of moves towards that sort of founder route, but also that one of the core elements of product is customer orientation. And we've got a webinar coming out on August the 18th, where we'll be talking to a panel of founders who've been through the pandemic, have doubled, trebled, quadrupled their business, and gone on some spectacular journeys. And I'm really looking forward to hosting it and picking it through. But I also know that we've interviewed them for a blog post that we've written under the sort of nod to Stephen Covey's concept of seven habits of highly successful fintech financial technology leaders. Easy for me to say. So we're looking at that, and we're having that conversation. One of those core themes and core strings that we're going to put on it is the realization and the benefits of being truly customer focused, which seems obvious, but this has been my soapbox for many, many years on this show, and anything I've written, any blogs I've put out, is just how many people in fintech are so obsessed with telling people how clever they are and how they've got products there that are the next big thing, but solving problems that don't really need to be solved. This, to me, this last 18 months has seen the real advent and real progress in people who are able to really understand problems that need to be solved. I had Mark Beeston from Illuminate Financial on last week, who's on the show, and he was talking about sort of, it being one of the core things they look for in investment as to where are the real problems in the industry, and that's the stable of companies who they're investing into at the moment. Tell me, I know this is something you've got some passion about as well. So I'll pull the cord and let you take your piece on this.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all that. I think it leads to longevity rather than it's the difference between flash in the pan propositions that have a big spike and then a massive drop off versus products that have slow and steady advocacy within the problem area. But it's all a lot of the customer research and the customer problem analysis is all foundational, and I think sometimes that it gets missed. You do the research early on in your product journey, and then sometimes that research is kind of archived because you've done it. Okay, we're building a product now. This is the roadmap, and the roadmap feeds off the research, but when you're a year down the line, it doesn't necessarily get reflected back. And there's loads of other techniques that you can use to ensure that you're on the pulse of what the customer thinks and wants. You can have ongoing research that's always happening in app, or having sit in co-design sessions. I've been in an organization where I suggested having actual customers who are going to sign up for the app come in and critique the designs that have not yet been built, because it's almost you're not necessarily taking their feedback as verbatim and gospel, but it's part of they are feeding into the app and they feel part of the proposition from before it's launched. So they will speak to people who are in their circles, and they'll start spreading the message that, okay, this thing's coming out in 3 months, and I was part of it. It's building the advocacy very, very early on, and then
makes so much sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, and then making sure that those touch points are still there. I think the best products in the world always listen to their customers on an ongoing basis.
Yeah,
and kill off things that because you can release stuff that seems cool and hits revenue metrics and hits retention and referral metrics and brings in more customers into the proposition. But actually, what the other thing that can be used to ensure that your customer's part of the proposition is getting customer feedback on features you've just launched. You can launch a feature, and if the feedback isn't great, to have the conviction to say, either this feature is just it's not great, but it brings in revenue, but it's not validating giving value back to the customer, so we kill it, or pivoting the feature a little bit so it better fits what the customer wants. I think it's a difficult decision to make, especially if you spend 3 months building something and put it out to the market, and then the advocacy isn't what you thought. But it's making sure the research you did 6 months ago, for example, and then the 6 months of building and then putting it out to the market, you don't just expect, oh, well, I built this thing that customers asked for 6 months ago. Well, why don't they want it? Well, you have to ask them, is it the way it's been designed? Is it the color scheme? Is it timing? The market shifted a bit. Do you need to shift what the product is slightly? And it's making sure that even when you launch something, that the product feedback is part of it.
You know what, this is stuff I could listen to for literally days and days and days. I think it's so interesting, and I've called this show for the last year and a half my sort of personal MBA, as I'm speaking to fascinating people at the top of their game, talking about things which I find really, really fascinating. And this, I've got pages of notes here that I've just been scrolling as you're talking through, with loads of little bits and pieces. And it doesn't matter what business you're in. These are this art of customer listening, I think, is so important to getting a product or a service or whatever it may be right for your customers. I love the way you simplify and bring that together. I could be talking for a long time about that, but I also want to talk to you about one of your other great passions, which is the sort of whole world of open banking, and if we look at one of the sort of other peak areas, if we're talking product management being an area that I've heard ever increasing velocity over the last 18 months, one of the others is very naturally open banking. Give me a snapshot of, and this might well need a second episode for to get all of this in, but give me your sort of thoughts in a nutshell here about the open banking world and why it's so exciting and what we can expect to see in it over the course of next year or so.
Yeah, I think I don't know again how much understanding people have open banking, but essentially open banking is a kind of originated from PSD2, which was an EU reg. Some people might not be happy to hear that an EU regulations helped foster a fintech ecosystem in the UK, but that's the reality of it. So it's come out of a regulation back in 2014-15, PSD2, which was to give more transparency of data back to customers and to increase competition when it comes to innovation in terms of financial data. So it's essentially giving customers' transaction data back to the customers and allowing third parties to use that data to give the customers tools that they can use to better their financial well-being, like improve their financial health and things like that. So over the past few years, what you've probably seen is big spike in apps that review all your transactional data and help you save more by creating things like pots or buckets, or like review where you're spending and then start suggesting improvements. So for example, across the pandemic, I've been a heavy user of things like Deliveroo and Uber Eats. Yeah, that kind of stuff. It brings those analytics to the forefront of your brain by analyzing all your accounts. I've got a HSBC account, I've got Monzo account, I've got a Starling account, and I've got a NatWest account. So across all of those accounts, where are your savings? Where's your current account? Where's your spending coming out of? Where are your bills coming from? Where's your mortgage coming from? Where rent coming from, etc. And providing a 360 view of your finances, rather than just here's your current account, here's your balance. That's what's available to spend. That's not, it's not a true reflection of your, not net worth, but it's not a true reflection of your 360 finances.
Yeah.
So what open banking has done is kind of give that data back to the customer via these third-party tools, things like company I worked with a couple of years ago, Lumio, personal finance management app, Snoop, Yolt, Money Dashboard. These are all apps that like take data via open banking rails, pull them into an app, and then you can slice and dice them any which way. That's been the main proponent of open banking. There's also PIS, so that's AIS, which is account information services, where you can pull information from your banking provider and then aggregate them and display things. There's also PIS, which is you can initiate payments through a different app from your core account. So having PIS services to pay for goods on a website through a different app to your HSBC app, for example. Yeah. But what's happening now is that's been the core of things that have happened so far. I think what's happening now is way more exciting. So there's a thing called variable recurring payments, which is effectively the ability for these third-party apps to now sweep money from different accounts into other accounts. So what it effectively does is, if you've got that 360 view of your finances and you've got money sitting in 5 different accounts, what you should be able to do in theory, and I think this is the motivation behind VRP, is that, for example, if I'm about to go into my overdraft in my HSBC account, but I have £2,500 in savings in like an online bonus saver in my NatWest account, the VRP rules-based system will be able to move some cash from that savings account into my current account to avoid an overdraft charge if the net benefit of moving that money from the savings account is better than being charged £5 for going into my overdraft.
Yeah.
So, that's the one benefit of it, but there's multiple. So, for example, if you're going to miss a payment on a credit card, for example, but you have money in savings, or your overdraft period is a week, or your overdraft rate is 1%, but your credit card charge is going to be 10%, then actually it makes more sense to take money out of your current account, pay off the credit card. The net interest is way less now, because those are all finances you have access to. They're just not being connected up in the right way.
It's brilliant, isn't it? Because again, it's got the customer at the center of all of this solution, and that to me absolutely is where fintech and fintech, I know, means so many different things to so many different people, be it open banking, payments, through to capital markets, through to all different areas. But for me, you use it as a general term of financial technology across all of those areas, and it all boils down to the same thing, which is providing a solution which makes things easier, reduces friction, saves cost, makes life better, makes it more. And this digital transformation, I think, is just has got so much to play in, and it will be people like you at the center of it who are able to see those solutions, articulate them one, and take it further forward. I could be talking about this for a long time, and I know I said I'd sort of have half an eye on the clock, which I have today. So there are two things I want to wrap up with. There is it's a really exciting time for you and your business as the world starts to open up a little bit more. We're seeing, you said before, there are people all over the world who you're able to help at the moment. Tell me who the ideal demographic is. Who should be listening to this and saying that we need to call Bitsul and get some help here?
Again, I think anyone who thinks they need that little bit of assistance at any stage of the product management life cycle, whether it's discovery, whether it's design, build, launch, scale, and whether it's just mentoring expertise or some advice, or being on the ground and actually helping with creating a roadmap and creating a strategy, or doing jobs to be done exercises and analysis on demographic to cement what the app is going to be or what the proposition is going to be. Anyone in that spectrum, that sounds
the world. The world, you can help the world. I love the sound of it.
Yeah.
And what's the best way of them getting in touch with you?
You can hit hello@bitsul.co.uk, or my direct email is jas@bitsul.co.uk. So it's jas@bitsul.co.uk.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure people will be. I promised two questions. The last one I'm going to ask you, I'll throw you off a little bit, is I love a well-stocked bookshelf, and it looks like there's some classics behind your left shoulder there. What's your one recommendation from that shelf that everyone should be reading at the moment?
Based on what I've just, I don't know. There's too many.
I knew I'd be able to get one question that would put marbles under your feet.
Yeah, I was going to say the lean startup. I think if you're building a product, or you're thinking about building a product, maybe the lean startup. But
yeah,
I have never read Atomic Habits before, and I'm currently deep into Atomic Habits. So actually, I would say if you're early stage startup, or thinking about it, or thinking you've got a full-time job and you want to maybe transition away and build something for yourself, or just change something in your life, whether it's doing more of an exercise routine or reducing alcohol, I think Atomic Habits is the book to read. It's
you are not the first person to have said that to me over the last couple of months. It's been one which is constantly been in there. It's in my Amazon wish list at the moment, but I haven't pulled the trigger. So on that recommendation, I'll be doing it. We'll compare notes very soon.
Do it. Awesome. Look forward to it.
Jas, listen, thanks so much for coming on the show. I've really enjoyed this. It's been a load of things I've picked up from it. It's been a great conversation, and I really appreciate your thoughts, candor, and insight on what I think is a really interesting world. So best of luck with everything. Glad it's going so well with what you're doing, and I'm sure it's going to go from strength to strength to strength. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Toby.
No problem at all, and thank you all for watching. We will see you soon on another episode of Fintech Focus TV. Thanks a lot.